this, we are recording, so you know that, and I'm glad that we were able to get this panel going. We tried once last year, and then we tried again in December, and quickly learned December is not a great time to try to get people together, definitely not in person, so too much going on. So here we are. Thank you all for being here. I am the president of the Taunton Area Chamber of Commerce. So I'm going to start off by thanking our sponsor for today, which is one of our panelists, One Connection. And I want to invite Dawn to say a few words about One Connection.
Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, for organizing this. I had the opportunity to meet Chris when we were opening about 8 months ago. We opened May 20th, and the chamber was incredibly helpful. They were great. You guys organized this wonderful ribbon cutting and have been incredibly supportive. I talk to Chris regularly, always saying, I'm trying to come to that meeting. I'm trying to come to that meeting. But I think, you know, with just opening, there's still a lot going on. So I'm looking forward to getting to know a lot of the members as we move forward and being a part of this community. So thank you to the chamber, and thank you for to be a part of this panel. Pretty excited.
Thank you very much, Dawn. I thought it'd be best if we probably let our panelists introduce themselves, a little bit about obviously their role, the organization that they work for, and any other pertinent kind of background information that you think will be helpful to our audience to know more about who you are. So let's start with Rob.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chris. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Robert Hansen. I'm the Assistant General Manager at Commonwealth Alternative Care. We're a subsidiary plant touching asset under Tilt Holdings, and we're located in 30 Mazone Boulevard, Taunton, Mass. We've been up and running since January 2018, and we are a vertically integrated licensed facility for both medical and adult use products, where we have a cultivation center, a production lab to make all of the oils and extracts. We have a commercial kitchen to make infused edibles and drinks. And then we have a packaging wholesale distribution center as well, all in our facility in Taunton. And then we have 3 stores as well, one attached to our production facility in Taunton, Mass, one in Brockton, Mass, and then one in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Again, medical and adult use for both our Taunton and Brockton store, but medical only for Cambridge. I got my start out in Denver in the industry in late 2015 and came on board in January 2020 here as the compliance director, but just over a year ago, shifted over to the number 2 spot in operations. So thank you all for having me.
Thanks, Rob. How about Phil?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon now. Thank you, Chris and the Chamber, for hosting this panel. My name is Philip Duart. I am the Chief Compliance Officer at Freshly Baked Company, which is a small Taunton-based micro cannabis business. So one of the questions is going to be about the different types of licenses, but essentially we are a small product manufacturer, so we wholesale all of our products to retailers. Our main product line is gummies, infused gummies, but we also do produce vapes and baked goods and a lot of other different products that we are continuing to bring online. Prior to working at Freshly Baked, I worked as a legislative aide to State Representative Carol Doherty, who represents most of Taunton and part of Easton, and worked for another representative prior to that. And I also serve on the Taunton City Council. So I kind of look at these issues from a lot of different perspectives, and I help Chris out with the Government Affairs Council of the Chamber. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Eddie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chris, Dawn, thank you very much for putting this on. Really appreciate Greatest Hits being able to join the Taunton family. So I am Eddie Guardiola. I am the Director of Compliance for Greatest Hits Cannabis Co. Our flagship store is in Dudley. We're out of Dudley. We have we're operational retail in Dudley. We are building out our product manufacturing and cultivation also in Dudley. We also have 2 other stores. One is here in Taunton on 9 Cape Road, right in between Globe Liquors and that car wash that seems to be busy all the time. And then we have another store that we just recently broke ground with in Lynn, Massachusetts. So we're going to have 3 retail stores, a product manufacturing and a cultivation site. I previously worked for the Cannabis Control Commission. I was there for 3 years. I was one of the original 8 investigators. Rob remembers me. I inspected Commonwealth Alternative Care. I was their lead investigator there. And I, as one of the original 8, we were tasked with not only opening basically all of the stores originally, but we were also tasked with assisting in the regulation rewrites, what's working, what's not working. So I have a pretty strong knowledge base in regulations. And I think that's why, I was recruited over at Greatest Hits, so I can help them out. Before that, I worked for the Attorney General's office. And before that, I was at the Public Defender. So I have a long career in investigations, and I'm happy to be moving on to greener pastures out of the government and being on this side. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Eddie. I like your, no pun intended, greener pastures. So, Dawn, I know you already introduced yourself. Anything else that you want to add before we get started? Oh, you're muted, I think.
Can you hear me? There we go. I previously had a career in the cannabis industry in Rhode Island. I was director of human resources at a dispensary there. And, this is not a path that I ever thought that I would be on. Definitely a little bit different than some of you guys. When I started off at the other dispensary, I actually was voting no to legalize cannabis. I had never smoked, never had an edible, never had any of this stuff. So my life over the last 6 or 7 years has really completely changed, and I've been enlightened. And it kind of suits me well in this position now, because I can relate to the people who just don't get it, or have such strong opinions. So I really love to talk to that person on the street to be able to say, hey, these are all the benefits, and come into our store and see what it's like. So I was really excited when I had the opportunity to come on board and open One Connection. We're in Dayton, Mass. And like I said, we opened about 8 months ago. We currently are just adult use. We are moving in the direction of being medical, but like Rob had mentioned, we're not vertically integrated yet, and you need to be vertically integrated in order for that to happen. So that's the process we're in right now, is getting ready to go through that approval again with the CCC. So it's been a journey, that's for sure.
Thank you, Dawn. Well, I just added a question. What is vertically integrated?
All right. I think
All
Rob
right.
should take that one, since he started it up.
Yeah, so a simple way to to define that term is that you kind of have an all in one shop, soup to nuts, production facility to sale, seed to sale. So you have a production facility and then a storefront, or up to 3 storefronts.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, so we do have some questions that have been submitted. We're going to go through those. I do want this to be conversational for folks too. So if you do have any follow-ups to any of these questions, please type them in the chat. And then as we get through these at the end, certainly willing to entertain any additional questions also. So first question, actually, I'll go to you, Dawn. What is the difference between medical use and recreational use?
So medical came around first. Cannabis was decriminalized in 2008 in Massachusetts, and then in 2012, medical dispensaries were able to open up as long as you had a card. In order to get a card, you need to get a doctor's recommendation, fill out an application, and then you would renew it annually. And medical versus adult use or rec The prices are a little bit different. There's no tax with medical. The dosage on the medical end, you could have higher dosage, especially for edible types of things. In adult use rec, everything is 5 milligrams. That's how it's sold. So you'd have to take multiple servings if you need to get into a higher dosage for your needs. Unlike medical, you can have a little bit of a higher dosage as well. Adult use, you have to be 21 and older in order to come in. You can get your medical card if you're 18 and older and you hit some of the criteria in order to get a medical card as well. That's some of the basics. If you can shop, a medical patient can shop at an adult use place. However, they're going to pay the 20% tax. But it's kind of two separate menus for most places.
Great, thank you. All right, Rob. So I've heard cannabis companies have to give back financially to the community. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, no problem. So during the licensing phase, and especially in new markets such as Massachusetts, which I would still consider very new, kind of, piggybacking off what Don said, you kind of have to get the community support when, you have some interest of investors or, owners that want to obtain a license in the municipality, in a certain municipality. So, historically, how new markets have started is, there's a licensing application phase, but then in Massachusetts, it's a little bit different, where I was very used to working in other regulated markets where you kind of get state approval, and then it's kind of, not a big deal usually to get the municipal approval. Here in Massachusetts, you almost have to do the reverse. So you have to approach the municipality and basically come up with what's called a HCA, or host community agreement, for that specific town or municipality that you're going to be residing in. And essentially, it's kind of a contract that gives back to the community based off of your gross revenue each year. So every year, for example, in Taunton, our facility will provide 3% of our gross revenue to the city of Taunton. We've had the pleasure of doing that now for 3 years, get to go to the town hall and kind of drop off a check. That's going to go towards, bettering the community. And that is kind of, the politically correct answer for how vertically integrated facilities, retail stores are contributing at a basic level here in Massachusetts, if operating a medical or adult use store. But I just did want to, point out that also with getting awarded a license via the application process, there's more than just, signing on to the host community agreement. There's a community impact plan that we as a business really need to put together and take seriously, and provide examples to the Cannabis Control Commission in the state on how we're going to make extra efforts besides just paying that HCA fee to positively impact our community. So we have an actual community outreach group here at Commonwealth Alternative Care. We work alongside local businesses, animal shelters. We've helped with New Hope, which is a battered women's shelter. We've helped with one of the board members on the chamber at their spa relaxation works. Just volunteering on cleanups around the Taunton Square, YMCA, etc. So we have a lot of fun contributing in small ways to the community, which I just really want to kind of boast about the most, because it's those small interactions that not only are going to provide and help and contribute to the community, but it also, like Don was saying, starts to kind of turns people's mindsets a little bit of, we're not just this big sketchy, grow with leaking pipes and we all just, smoke weed. It's actually, we do quite the opposite. It's, where it's a professional, almost medical, pharmaceutical grade facility. And not only do, we have a hard job, but we actually have the pressure of getting awarded that license to do extra and prove it at the end of each year. Upon our, when we need to renew our license, we then need to prove, what we've done for the community. So all in all, I think that both financially, there's a great opportunity here. Who knows how long it'll last, but in Massachusetts, these license holders to contribute financially back to the community. But there's also much more ways that we're contributing as well. one small story that real quick, it wasn't here, but it was in Colorado. Probably like a lot of the panelists, got a hard time from family and friends about entering the industry. What are you doing? My wife was kind of a hard critic in the beginning, but she actually was a kindergarten teacher at the oldest school in Denver, Colorado. And it was in 2017 when the industry kind of was, kind of up and running, in full blown force there, where she came home and said, "Oh, we're getting a $2.5 million HVAC and air cooling unit for our school," and it was donated all with the tax revenue from legal cannabis sales in Colorado. So that quickly changed her. And that was a cool story that I just love to share with everyone.
Thanks, Rob. I appreciate that. I do have a follow-up question on that. Is the percentage somewhat standardized across municipalities, or is it individualized? And also, as an additional question is, if Taunton is 3%, is it 3% across the board for all cannabis in Taunton? So it's really two questions.
That's a great question. The 3% is the minimum standard. There are municipalities, and I just don't have the exact details off the top of my head, but comfortable to say in front of the group that each municipality is different on how they want to approach it. So some could be a little bit higher than 3%. Some could be at the 3%, but have to then, make a annual donation to the police, the fire department, or something of that nature. So it is different across all municipalities, but at the end of the day, the basic minimum is a 3%. 3% off the gross revenue for the year.
Chris, can I just chime in on that as well?
Yeah.
Because that's actually an evolving topic. So this host community impact fee has been a controversial topic of discussion ever since the law was originally passed, because some people, especially in the business community, view it to be an additional tax on the businesses themselves, especially now where we see that there is very minimal impact on the community, because it's supposed to be a community impact fee. So, when the law was being passed, people thought there would be all these negative impacts on communities when these stores and other operators opened, but that has certainly not played out. And so that fee was always supposed to be based directly on community impacts, but that was not how it played out when these agreements were put into effect. And most communities just opted for the default 3%, and the businesses not wanting to, they obviously want to enter into the agreement, so they just agreed to the 3%. But just this past summer, a new law was passed that has now addressed this issue, hopefully once and for all, to say very clearly that the host community impact fee has to be directly tied to the impacts on the community. So if a municipality cannot demonstrate what those impacts are with numbers tied to them, then there is no legal obligation for those fees to be paid. And this all, started in the courts as well, with a lawsuit that was brought by a retail store in Haverhill, which kind of led to all of this being discussed very publicly in the industry. But it's been the intention all along that the community impact fee is supposed to be directly tied to community impacts. But as Rob said, there's certainly other things that we do to fulfill our positive impact plans that we're required to have. And then with retail stores as well, the municipalities get their 3% excise tax. And a lot of people think that that is the same 3%, but it's two separate things. There's the community impact fee, and then the excise tax, which is a flat 3%.
Oh, that was helpful, Phil. I really appreciate that. I'm curious, can you give an example of what a municipality could do directly related to community impact?
Traffic, I think, was a big one. Now that the industry is kind of established and, there's plenty of retail stores, the traffic has died down, but that was a big one originally. People thought there would be significant impacts on traffic and addressing traffic patterns. You know, some people think that there's impacts on the police department in patrolling these areas. I personally don't think that that is a valid community impact because there's no more crime at, you know, a retail cannabis facility than a liquor store, a pharmacy, or gas station. So that the change in the law has just happened. It just took effect on November 11th, I think. And the CCC, the Cannabis Control Commission, has to promulgate regulations of how that will now play out for these agreements to be renegotiated. So it's still playing out to see how municipalities will have to justify those costs.
Stay
So
tuned.
something to stay tuned on, yep.
So Eddie, there seem to be many different license types, as we referred to in the beginning of the call. Can you briefly describe them and the differences?
Absolutely. So you're right, there are many license types out there. We currently have 10 license types with some variation in between, but I can go through them. I'll start with the popular ones that everybody knows, or I think everybody may know. We have marijuana cultivator. The cultivator, they're the ones that actually grow the cannabis for the industry. They're able to process it as well as package it. The thing about cultivator is that they can transport it to other establishments like a product manufacturer or a retailer, but they can't actually sell it to consumers. And that's kind of a trend in most of these. They have tiers starting from tier 1 to tier 11, and that's from 5,000 square feet of canopy all the way up to 100,000 square feet of canopy. Then we have a product manufacturer. These are the facilities that obtain product from the cultivators, and then they process it. I think Phil had mentioned freshly baked and what they do, and this is where it would, not fully be exactly what he's doing, but they're the ones that make the concentrates, the vapes, the edibles, basically anything that is infused with cannabis. They're able to produce these and then send them out to the retailers as well. So the retailers is the next one where all the cannabis goes to, and this is where the consumers can purchase their cannabis. Retailers are allowed to bring in cannabis, store it here, and then they can sell it to the consumer directly. They can't do any processing or they can't do any cultivating at their store. Then we have marijuana transporters. So there's third-party transporters and there's existing licensed transporters. So, a place like Commonwealth Alternative Care or any of these other types, they might have their own transport vehicles in order to basically run on their own schedule of when and where they would like to deliver their product to. And then there's third-party transporter, which is basically that it's a licensed entity that goes from one establishment, transfers all the product to another establishment. Then there's delivery only, which they have two parts. There's a delivery courier and the delivery operator. The courier is the one that you can call up basically and have them deliver marijuana or cannabis directly to you as a consumer. And they work with retail establishments around their licensed area. And the operator is similar to that, but one caveat is that they can actually warehouse the product. So they can get product from many different places, have it in an inspected facility where they warehouse it, and then they can basically pick the product from there and deliver it to the consumers. Then we have independent testing laboratory. And that is where in Massachusetts, all cannabis product needs to be tested in accordance with, MDOT, Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, as well as the Cannabis Control Commission's limitations on what can and can't be passed or failed. Microbusiness, tier 1 product manufacturer. So basically, this is like freshly baked, as Phil had mentioned. They're able to cultivate and or produce, be a product manufacturer. The microbusiness is basically a smaller business, and they might be able to have a delivery endorsement as well. And if they get a delivery endorsement through the CCC, then they can deliver straight to consumers. If not, they can transfer product to the retailers. Then we have the craft marijuana cooperative. So some of you may know what a co-op is, but this is basically it. It's a group of Massachusetts residents acting as a cooperative, and they can cultivate, process, package, and transfer cannabis but to other facilities, but they can't do it to consumers. Then we have the social consumption establishment. This has been a hot topic for the past few years, but basically these are the cannabis lounges or pot cafes that you may have heard about. There's a lot that is going on with social consumption establishments at the moment. It was addressed recently in this past summer about how to get those going. I think I can talk a little bit about that a little later. And then we have research facility licenses, which is basically a licensed facility that you can either work on behalf of the government might send you some research projects, or you could run your own research on testing your own phenotypes. You want to see what hybrids you can make and test them out basically, and you're able to share that with other people or not if it's proprietary. And we don't see a lot of the last couple license types out there. It's the big ones are the cultivators, processors, and retailers.
Wow.
Wow, is right. There's a lot of licenses out there.
So I have some thoughts on that. I was just thinking about how, that's a lot of job creation. It's I suspect, there's also entrepreneurship that's going on. And then on the other side of it, you have the regulation side where, that's a lot to regulate. So there must be, job opportunities on the regulation side and the auditing side, because that's, a lot going on to have to keep, make sure that it's, I know from having toured CAC with Rob, even just the small amount that I'm aware of, how heavily regulated it is. And so I would hope and assume that that type of heavy regulation would exist for all of these other license types as well.
Yeah, and Commonwealth Alternative Care, excuse me, is a little different than some of the other places because it's not just medical and it's not just recreational. It is co-located. So they'll, on the regulation side, they'll have a compliance officer who were basically grandfathered in from Department of Public Health. They were the compliance folks that started with the medical industry, and then the investigators, which is who regulates the adult use side. So, a place like Commonwealth Alternative Care could run into an issue that's only medical issue. So a compliance officer would then have to address that, versus if it's an adult use issue, the investigator would have to address that. So yes, there are a lot of license types out there, and formerly of the CCC, I can tell you that it is very difficult to navigate every single license type out there and try to roll them out. When I was there, I was helping to roll out the marijuana courier license type, and they kind of established some regulations within 935 CMR 500, but there are a lot more processes and steps to take in order for it to actually be rolled out. So they have a lot on their hands. And as you say, it does create job opportunities. I know that the Cannabis Control Commission is always looking for basically waves of investigators for inspections. Unfortunately, they don't hire as fast or as many as the industry may need. So some of the processes, some of our inspections, some of our questions that don't get answered on time may take a long time just because it is, they're a little understaffed. But on the other side, all of these license types do create wonderful job opportunities with, giving people the knowledge and expertise of going through the cannabis industry, one that is, growing day by day, not just in Massachusetts, but throughout the country, eventually, hopefully federally as well. But yeah, just giving people the understanding, knowledge, and expertise of working through the cannabis industry is very important for us as, cannabis business leaders.
Thank you very much for that, Eddie. I'm going to move on to a question for Phil. So we hear about social equity related to the licenses. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so
I was like, oh, hopefully they didn't
equity-
hear anything we just said.
I think is probably the single-handed most important aspect of the original legalization law. And it's also been reaffirmed by the most recent law that was passed. And it really strives to bring in and involve and give opportunity to people who have been the most affected by the failed war on drugs. People who, have been convicted and sentenced for marijuana offenses, to try to now, get them involved in this industry to try to repair those harms. So there's two main equity programs through the Cannabis Control Commission. So there's the Economic Empowerment Program and the Social Equity Program, and they each have different criteria. But the Economic Empowerment Program tries to, get people who have demonstrated experience in business practices that promote economic empowerment for disproportionately impacted communities. And so the CCC has a list of areas of disproportionate impact. So places where there was higher marijuana convictions and those types of things. And so, usually what you see is that it's gateway cities, urban areas that are obviously have more crime enforcement. And so the criteria for the economic empowerment, there's 5 different criteria, and you have to meet at least 3 of them. The first, a majority of the ownership belongs to people who have lived in areas of disproportionate impact for 5 of the last 10 years. 2, a majority of the ownership has held 1 or more previous position where the primary population served was people who have been disproportionately impacted. 3, a majority of the ownership is made up of Black, African American, Hispanic, or Latino individuals. 4, at least 51% of current employees reside in an area of disproportionate impact. 5, at least 51% of employees have drug-related PORI offenses but are otherwise legally employable. And lastly, owners can demonstrate significant past experience in those business practices. So for economic empowerment, you have to meet at least 3 of those criteria. And that program was set up on the front end. So it was people that filed applications in the original pool. And so, there's a set number of those people out there. The other program is the social equity program. So the owners of my company, Freshly Baked, are members of the social equity program. Phil Smith was actually a member of the first cohort. And so the social equity program not only provides expedited review of applications, but it also provides technical assistance and training to the people in that program. So for both economic empowerment and social equity, you get an expedited review of your application. So you, for lack of a better words, you get pushed to the front of the line. But the social equity program also provides very critical knowledge to these business owners so that they can get up and running as quickly as possible. And then that program has its own list of criteria. There's only 3. So you have to meet at least 1 of the 3. The first being the applicant doesn't exceed 400% of the area median income and lives in an area of disproportionate impact for 5 of the last 10 years. 2, the applicants reside in Massachusetts for the last 12 months and have a conviction or continuance without a finding for a drug-related offense. And 3, the applicant resides in Massachusetts for the last 12 months and is either married to or the child of an individual convicted for a drug-related offense. So you just have to meet 1 of those criteria to be in the social equity program. Social equity has become, a big buzzword in the industry. It's certainly something that people do a lot of talking about, but unfortunately, there is not much action. It was sad that it took the legislature so long to come back and revisit the topic of social equity. But we're glad that they finally did it. I think one of the most significant things that they did in this legislation from last year was create a social equity trust fund. And so that trust fund will provide grants and loans, including no interest and forgivable loans to social equity program participants and economic empowerment priority applicants to provide them capital to get their businesses started and to grow their businesses. Because one of the things that people often forget is that it wasn't just those equity applicants that were pushed to the front of the line at the beginning. The medical operators were also pushed to the front of the line. And because medical operators have to be vertically integrated, oftentimes it is large corporations that have plenty of capital. And so when you're starting a new industry, which is the adult use industry, you're now putting these equity applicants up against these large corporations who have operated on the medical side. And so naturally, they're going to be able to get started, way ahead of these equity applicants, who have limited experience in this industry. So this loan fund is supposed to address at least one of those issues, which is capital, to provide funding for these businesses. But the other side of it is just genuine business practices. And from our end, as a product manufacturer, we obviously provide our products wholesale to retailers. And one of the biggest topics that we discuss is supplier diversity. And I think our relationship with One Connection and Dawn is a great example because she, carries our products and does so consistently because of the oversaturation of products in the industry. A lot of people have brands going in and out and circulation of brands, but there's only, I think, about 20 social equity businesses currently operating in the industry. So, if people really are putting their money where their mouths are, it's not a big ask to ask them to increase their supplier diversity if they're on the retail end and carry these social equity products. Because that, at the end of the day, it's a business. So, the social equity businesses need to be carried in retail stores. And then if you flip that on the other end, if you're a social equity retail store, we as a product manufacturer, we work deals to try to help out our social equity retailers that we provide products to. And so, other companies, whether they be cultivation or product manufacturers, should also be doing that to try to give a boost to social equity retailers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done for social equity, especially right now. I'm sure many people have seen, there's been a lot of articles in the Boston Globe recently about the contraction of the cannabis industry. So it was on the rise and growing for several years, but now we've reached the point of oversaturation where the market is starting to contract, and hopefully it will stabilize soon. But this is a vital time to make sure that the contraction of the market is not disproportionately harming social equity businesses that have worked so hard to establish their business and now are facing tough economic times. I think just recently, within the past few weeks, the first Black operated cultivator went out of business. So that was certainly a disturbing piece of news. And so we as an industry, both on the CCC side, the legislative side, but also on the business side, through our business practices, need to do everything we can to actually fulfill the promises and commitments that we make to being devoted to social equity.
Thank you very much, Phil, for that. We have a few more questions I want to make sure we get to, and then have time for any questions from the group, because it's a lot of information that they're all processing. So my next question is for Rob. Rob, this is probably a loaded question that will have to be condensed, but how do you test the product?
Yeah, great question. First thing that everyone should know is that any product that's considered a finished good to be sold out of a store for wholesale, it needs to be tested. So no matter what type of product category we're referring to, there is strict testing requirements, because as all licensees should, especially with the infancy of the legal market, safety and quality of products is the #1 priority for us here at CAC, and I'm sure for everyone else on this call. So testing is a huge validation measure that the products that we are sending out to sell to consumers is safe. So a couple of examples is the two biggest categories of testing is looking for contamination of product, and then potency, the strength of the overall product. For example, flour, every whether it's pre-packed flour in 1/8, an ounce, pre-roll, infused pre-roll, those have strict testing requirements that we have to send out at our facility before to an independent testing lab, one of the license types that Eddie was referring to earlier on. And it needs to pass its testing before we can even package it up into whatever we want to package it into, whatever finished good that we're going to package that into. For flour, for example, the 4 main contamination categories that it's tested for, #1 is going to be microbiological impurities. An example of that could be mold, yeast, bacteria. Second one is going to be for pesticides or plant growth hormones that could be unhealthy to be used during the cultivation period. The third is going to be heavy metals, so lead, arsenic, cadmium, etc. And then we have our potency. So the only other thing that I wanted to bring up besides those main categories is when it comes to oils and dabbable concentrates, there is some extra required testing, and that is going to be for the main one is going to be for the solvents, looking for any residual solvents left over after the processing. So with oils, when you are using hydrocarbon extraction, or let's say ethanol extraction, you are using butane, propane, and ethanol to extract the cannabinoids from the plant to make it into that pure oil or concentrated unit. So we need to make sure that our safe closed loop systems are recapturing and purging off all of those, any potential residual solvents, so that it's safe for the consumer in the end. One thing that I just wanted to point out is that, I was a cannabis user for a lot of my life. There was, before I got into the legal industry, I was lucky enough to meet my drug dealer behind the Burger King in the parking lot, etc. Thought it was all good. I then got my first job, and my first boss, because of my lack of experience in the industry, he put me in a 6-month expedited training through cultivation. So from propagation, veg, flower through harvest. And I got to learn a lot from the expert growers. And big thing about the black market that I didn't realize, from our sense in the legal market, growing cannabis is very difficult. It's a touchy plant. A lot can go wrong very fast. So you need to have experience and the expertise to make it from small plant to harvest material. A lot of the times during the scarier moments, whether it's a bug infestation, disease, contamination of whatever sorts, there are certain foliar sprays or drenches, let's just say pesticides, plant growth hormones, that can help alleviate your problem and make your crop able to make it to the end. And then, that's what us as a business wants to do. What I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of unethical practices when it comes to this, mostly both in the black market, but also in the legal market, because it comes down to that greediness of I cannot cut my crop down and lose that potential revenue. So what I realized was, a lot of the stuff that I was probably smoking or ingesting could have been manipulated in some way, whether it was sprayed with an illegal pesticide or a pesticide that would be illegal in the legal market, way too late in flower or even post-harvest. And these are like kind of invisible worries that, you don't really take into consideration when you buy your bag of flour from or get handed it from your friend or wherever. It's like, where did that come from? Where did that flour come from? Where did that edible come from? Especially now with the vape crisis, going back to the oils, one of the required testings, additional required testings now, besides residual solvents, is going to be that thickening agent usually used in the cosmetic industry called vitamin E acetate. We're actually finally, with these cartridges, unfortunately, there is such thing now as, cutting marijuana. So a lot of the time in 2020, if we all remember the national vape crisis, it was taken very seriously. We found that on the black market, a lot of folks were cutting the oil with this thickening agent that is not made, that does not bode well with inhalation purposes. So now we're, making sure that we're looking out for that thickening agent that could, be used in the black market and legal industry. My whole point about all of this is that if we have any adult use shoppers and we're complaining about the 20% tax, is I would rather pay that 20% tax knowing that I can grab that certificate of analysis or those test results right from that specific batch that I bought the finished good from, and trace it back through our inventory control system and through the independent testing lab that tested that bulk batch that turned into the pre-roll that I bought. I'd rather do that any day than kind of thinking of the scarier, times when I didn't know what my stuff was sprayed with or cut with. And it can very much, it's applicable now in this day and age, especially in the black market. So that's my biggest message. Everything is tested. It's tested very rigorously for a lot of different potential contaminations. It's tested for the strength, so it shows you what you're getting yourself into. I think I hear a lot that, we used to smoke hay back in the day at like 10%, and now we're, getting like 36% stuff. So there's certainly a difference in terms of potency and strength. So reading that label is very important. You can always ask your bud tender for the COA or certificate of analysis. It's required for record keeping purposes that all dispensaries have every COA for every finished good it buys. And I think it's worth the 20% tax, just knowing that you're getting quality, safe cannabis. Of course, things could happen, but it's a huge step up in my opinion, and a win for the industry.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to let Eddie add to this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I spot on, Rob. Nice job. And I agree with you 100% that, you didn't know what you were smoking back in the day with, we used to call it swag, sticks and seeds in there, and you don't know what's on there. It comes in a brick from somewhere. You don't know what happened to it. So I think it's important to make sure that everybody understands the importance of testing. I was wondering if you would be able to touch upon what happens if a product fails, and maybe talk a little bit about remediation.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Eddie. So just because, say you have a batch of flour, which again, very similar to the traditional agricultural market with, let's just say, our regular produce. It's susceptible to different forms of contamination, disease, bugs, etc. But that doesn't necessarily mean like the first fail, it's deemed unsafe. You can find, different portions of the batches that may have been affected. And also sometimes a fail is just, over the cusp of the upper exposure limit for whatever contamination you're testing for and measuring. So let's just say it's mold and yeast, the upper, the highest limit that we can test for, it's measured in CFUs or colony forming units per gram. If you get over 10,000 CFUs per gram, but you're just at like 10,500, you're going to fail, but you can go ahead and there's our failing test response procedures that are clearly written out in the regulations here in Mass specific to cannabis. You can basically go and rework that batch that failed through different measures. One of the most popular ways is through remediation. And then you can send it back through specific requirements for a retest. And if that passes, you can then go ahead and package up that product to whatever type of finished good you want to sell it as. If it does fail twice, though, and you follow all the procedures to a T, you do unfortunately have to destroy that batch. And after 2 attempts, the Cannabis Control Commission in the regulations, they're not going to even take the chance of letting that go be turned into a finished good.
Thanks for clarifying that, Rob. So we have a couple of other questions. There seem to be a little bit of follow-ups to things we've already talked about. So I just want to take a pause because we're nearing the end and just ask if there's any questions from our attendees today before we finish up with a little bit more detail on some of these other topics. Anybody?
Question.
Yes.
I wanted to see where you think this is going when it comes in terms to how cannabis works in the workforce, and when it comes to drug testing and adult use ever being used while at work. A lot of times for adult use, people are using this for anxiety in low micro doses to work with things instead of pharmaceutical drugs. So I'm wondering how you see that progressing.
I can take this one. Hi, Chris. Thanks for the question. So it is legal. Cannabis use is legal in Massachusetts, first and foremost. You can, put it up there with alcohol is legal in Massachusetts, first and foremost. I think it's going to be up to, there's no Massachusetts regulation or law saying that a person cannot consume it. Now it's up to a business themselves to put into their own manual whether or not it is allowed. I think that it's important to talk to your, let your employees know that, it's not acceptable during work hours. Please don't come in high because you're going to be handling some machinery. Just the same as you would have a policy for alcohol, like don't come in drunk, don't drink on the job. I don't think there's anything out there, and other panelists correct me if I'm wrong, that Massachusetts gives protections for, basically, meaning they are kind of laissez-faire when it comes to it's legal. You as a business owner will have to determine how you want to put it into a policy. So I'm not sure if Massachusetts will ever touch that, make it some sort of, across the board language saying you can't use it while at work. Because the reality is some people are. You might not even know that some people are, but some people are, and some people are prescribed it. So it's just a matter of how your company, individual company, will tolerate some sort of adult or medical use.
And I'll add to Eddie's answer. Chris, your other piece of the question was drug testing with companies. I definitely, if I was a betting man, think that there's going to be some companies that stay strict and keep THC or marijuana on their drug test panels. But as you're seeing kind of, with the NBA recently, they just, stopped drug testing their players for marijuana. And the other thing is, you're seeing it a lot with different kind of well-known, bigger name corporate companies, as well as smaller companies, of just realizing that, it's kind of unfair because it's going to stay in your system for, a week to a month, depending on body type and different situations. So I think that's catching on, that idea of, well, is this really fair if someone, smoked a joint Friday night after work, a killer week, and just, went out with buddies, and then we drug tested them on Wednesday the next week, and they had some in their system. I think the gray area of like when and how did this end up in your system is being realized by companies that it might not be that fair to the individual.
That makes sense. Any other questions from our attendees? I think there's some, and I see I have a couple of one or two bankers on the call here. And I know that for me being, from my limited perspective, you always hear, obviously it's not federally approved. So, people who want to open whatever type of cannabis business have a hard time getting funding, have a hard time getting loans from federally insured banks and things like that. So I think for me, again, with my limited knowledge, I thought, oh, they can't get any loans from any banks. But I've realized that's probably not always the case. So if we have a banker on the call, can you weigh in, please?
Hi, Chris. Thank you. So my name is Victoria Stockbarger. I'm with Bank 5. We are a local community bank. We are state chartered, so our board of directors did make the decision that we wanted to invest and start working with the cannabis industry. We have been in the industry for about a year, going on 2 years. So we are new compared to a lot of you guys. But like it seems that everyone has done at one stage or the other. Everything's kind of a learning curve. So we've learned a lot, and we are thankfully able to offer lending. Initially, it did start with just doing asset-based lending. So it's for real estate acquisition or things like that, or equipment purchases. Since then, we have opened it up to lines of credits to assist with working capital. Those tend to be smaller loan amounts, but nonetheless, we are now pretty much full servicing in terms of lending, and of course with the deposit accounts as well.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Hi, Kristen Glennon from Bay Coast Bank. I'll piggyback on what Victoria said. Yeah, we've been in the program for 4 years now. Started out kind of mimicking what the state did. We started out with medical and soon learned that there was a need for recreational banking as well. So we have a number of clients from Western Mass down to the Cape and up to the North Shore, and we started lending very early on. So same thing, we're doing what we would consider tier 1 lending along with ancillary lending, because you have landlords that are not necessarily cannabis related, but their tenants are, and they're looking for loans within their portfolio. So it is out there, and we are both federal and state chartered. So regardless of the illegality, I think that if you have a strong program and you have monitoring in place, similar to all the compliance people that are actually working in the field, I think lending is an option as long as you have a program that backs it up.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Any other questions from our group? I do see that the Council on Aging is asking. I can actually send you all of that contact information after the call. I'd be happy to do that. Any other questions from our group? We're in our last moments here. I hope you all felt it was as informative as I thought. I want to thank our panelists for their, I'm sure we could have kept going for another hour at least with the level of detail. And I love these Q&As because oftentimes I joke that people don't know what they don't know, and that's why these are so incredibly helpful. A couple of programming notes. I do want to point out that Dawn and I just finalized moments before we started the call that One Connection will be hosting our Coffee and Conversation Networking Hour, and that will be on the 23rd. So those of you on the call can head on over to One Connection, have some coffee, a little bit of breakfast, maybe a little bit more, whatever you want, no pressure. But it's a great networking opportunity and a great venue. So I just wanted to put in a plug for that. And also next on February 8th, our human resources group will be discussing dismissing staff, which is not a fun topic, but I know a lot of folks in HR and small business owners could use some help in these conversations, and this will be led by an employment attorney. So I wanted to just let you all know of those 2 programming notes. Thank you all again so much for being on the call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Dawn.
Chris.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
No
have a
time.
great day.